Accessibility ain't just for those with disabilities. Makes the world better for everyone, online as well as in person. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the blind blogger Maxwell Ivy, and this is another episode of the Accessibility Advantage, which you can find at theaccessibilityadvantage.com. I am a accessibility expert who has been educating people for almost 2 decades now, and am available for writing, speaking, consulting, and podcasting. So I do hope you will reach out to me if you have questions. I love educating people, and maybe you'll have an idea or be a great guest for a future episode. TheAccessibilityAdvantage.com. I am a 59-year-old Caucasian male, rather large one. I have medium length brown hair that now has some gray and silver in it because my stylist told me I don't have to dye it anymore. I have greenish blue, brown eyes, whatever. Depends on the person I ask as to what color they are. I'm wearing a what's called a computer chip shirt, which I think is a light blue or a gray, with a black tie, which I'm sure of. And my pronouns are he or him. I'm a almost totally blind person from retinitis pigmentosa, RRP. And now that I've done all of that stuff, I can introduce my guest, which I'm really looking forward to because I've already talked to her for like 2 hours when it was supposed to be 20 minutes. I'm speaking with Tracy King, and she is a neurodivergent mom who left the corporate world to start a business to provide her highest purpose. Her business is called Inspire ED, and it's a consultancy and instructional learning agency. And she primarily works with professional associations and continuing education providers to craft education experiences that make a difference. I really love that. And she says, while she did not know she was neurodivergent when she started her business, she can look back and see that all the decisions she made led to a company that is accessible and inclusive, not only for herself, but for her clients and anyone who works with her. And her website is inspire-ed.com. And so, Tracy, thank you for coming on the podcast and welcome to the Accessibility Advantage.
Thank you so much, Max. It's a privilege to be here.
Well, I'm really happy that you are here. Like I said, we've had a couple of great conversations, including like a half hour before we started this. So I'm sure we're going to cover some great stuff. And I think it's interesting. As a visually impaired person, I may not have understood how much vision I would lose, but it's not like you can be unsure that you're losing your vision. It has to be an unusual circumstance to live your life, most of your life, thinking there you are quote unquote normal, and then through experiences you find out that I don't want to say different because we both agreed that's one of the reasons we have so much trouble is because of words like different and other. But you realize that your assumptions about yourself as a person were not correct. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah. I mean, I always thought I was a weird kid, but that was a me thing. Yeah.
I thought all kids were weird. Uh, and I know all teenagers are weird, so it probably was adulthood before you really figured it out. I mean,
Yep. Yeah, it's wild to um just self-discover in adulthood that you're neurodivergent, and then just take a review of your entire life and see how it's always been there, but your weirdness or different way of being, what you need in order to feel supportive and be your best self is actually not normed. And the criteria are tricky because it's really taking a look at a slice of the experience of being autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, and other ways that neurodiversity presents, really framing it around a young male experience, predominantly white. And so we know from research now that females internalize a lot of their neurodivergent characteristics, and so they're not necessarily as as apparent to most people. We still have similar communication norms and things like that, but our ways of being are often interpreted as being a shy girl, or she loves horses. If it were trains, then someone might have thought I was autistic. That, and our differences are just kind of tucked into a girl way of being, instead of really seeing what our support needs are. Meltdowns being unfortunately framed as tantrums, instead of understanding what's actually happening inside of our nervous system. And so I just have internalized, I know that I'm different, and but just didn't know that that was why, and have always just tried to live up to the norms that surrounded me. But you get to a point in your adulthood when you're a mom like me, and your kids start getting diagnosed with ADHD, and you realize that this is inherited, and their brains work like my brains, and I've been teaching them how to mask instead of understanding what their support needs are. It was a radical um, transformation that happened inside of our family when we discovered that.
That's an important point you make, that even now we continue to have issues in our medical profession because we are not training doctors to approach things based on gender, based on the differences of even differences in skin color can cause some problems with diagnosis in certain areas. And yet we continue to avoid addressing that in our medical education system out there. And I can totally see a woman having a meltdown just being seen as a diva, somebody having a tantrum, as opposed to it being seen as a symptom of a serious mental or neurological illness.
Right. And that misinterpretation then becomes internalized, and that internalization is harmful. And we know from research that continues to come out how harmful masking is, and perpetuating that mask. And so it's really important that we expand our understanding of how neurodivergent traits are expressed in males and females, across BIPOC communities, across cultures. LGBTQ people typically are misdiagnosed as well, so that more people can access support that they need in order to be their best selves.
Right. So I know what you mean when you use the word masking, but I feel like to make sure we don't lose anybody, it would be helpful if you would explain what people generally assume masking means and what you see it to mean.
Great point. Great point. Well, simply, masking means autistic, ADHD, or otherwise neurodivergent person can see the norms, the social norms, the norms in the workplace or in school of how people are supposed to behave, and does everything to perform to those norms, even though that's in conflict with our natural ways of being, and how our nervous system is supported. So, for example, for an autistic person like me, that would mean that I would not allow myself to fidget, because that's seen as disruptive,
Wow.
when fidgeting actually helps calm my nervous system so that I can focus and attend, so I can learn, so I can speak, so that I can use my brain. Right? And so it's harmful to me not to be able to stim. It actually really creates a lot of stress inside my body and my nervous system that can later um, be become a migraine, or extreme fatigue, inflammation in my body, or otherwise just severe executive dysfunction. So it's something as simple as that, is allowing me to use a quiet fidget allows me to be my best self. But when I'm masking, I'm not allowing myself that simple access to a regulated nervous system.
Right. So when you're masking, basically you're being somebody you're not, and you're doing it for extended periods of time. And the longer you have to do it, the more destructive it is, and the more negative experiences it can lead to when you do finally get to the breaking point of masking.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and because the mask isn't not me, it's me, but it's me performing in a way that's harmful to me.
Yes.
So another example would be Um, let's see. Like scheduling meetings with me late in the day isn't my best brain part of the day. I can do that. I'll show up and I'll perform to the best of my ability. But scheduling meetings at the beginning of the day, you'll get my best brain. And so both are going to be me, but one is going to be me with a regulated nervous system, and one's going to be me struggling. And I'll perform through that struggle. But of course, that late in the day meeting is going to be really challenging for me. Um, Similar, like when I'm at conferences and there isn't a quiet space to go to. I can like power through and be like networking Tracy and going to all the sessions Tracy, but then you're going to find me huddled in a bathroom stall or something because at some point I need to regulate my nervous system. Right? And so
Yeah.
just providing a quiet space can allow me to do both, to regulate and to be fully present.
Yeah, you're as I'm hearing you talk about quiet space, it reminds me of a conference I went to in New Jersey in 2018 or 19. It was called an unblinded sales conference, and they invited 100 blind people to be there as part of their marketing approach, and they paid our expenses. So I was willing to be used as a shill for a free trip to New Jersey. But the thing I remember is they had a quiet room for the dogs, but when I asked, I found out there was no quiet room for the people.
Fascinating.
They thought about the guide dogs, but didn't think about possibly having multiple disabilities represented in one person, and did not think about having quiet rooms for the people. I don't know why that's stuck in my
Mm.
brain all this time, but it did.
Wow. Yeah, that was an oversight for sure. I'm starting to see quiet rooms appear more and more at events, but I can tell when they've been informed by a neurodivergent professional's perspective and when they're just like networking spaces off to the side, right? You can tell when they are crafted for someone to be able to regulate their nervous system rather than just being someplace someone brings their laptop and works and
Basically, basically, you can tell the difference between something they created out of obligation or fear versus something they created out of sincere desire to help the person.
And that's why it's so important to center the perspective and the voice of the people you're seeking to serve as you're creating your design processes and putting these spaces and materials together. Because if they would have asked you, Max, what would have been useful to you at this event, they would have been informed in a positive way, right? And that's
Yes,
why, yeah, so important to center the voices of the different abilities that we're inviting into our spaces.
right. Although I have a different approach to mobility than the vast majority of people with vision loss, my approach is relationship oriented. My goal is to find somebody who is happy with me putting my hand on their shoulder and following them to the same destination, even if maybe they're going on to a different one. I'm not a high tech apps person. I'm not a count steps person. I'm not a show up a day early and learn where everything is kind of person. Because over the years, I've learned, I have some great conversations. I make some lifelong friends. I have some really cool experiences, like the time I met a songwriter on the train to DC in 2018. So mine is more of a problem solver relationship approach to mobility, and I'm in the vast minority because, as I'm sure you can imagine, there's a lot of emphasis on independence for independence's own sake, especially within the vision loss community. So
That's great perspective. I appreciate that.
yes, I'm not an ideal blind person for anybody to use, but I will give them my thoughts based on everybody else I've met, including
Yeah.
including experiences like today where I get to talk to you, Tracy, somebody who has experiences with things that I can read about, but I can't live. So that's I appreciate your kind words. So you basically created this company and you built a business that is inclusive without really realizing that you were doing that at the time. I really wish more people could do that without having to think about it, but it kind of speaks to the millions of people who start out solving a problem for themselves, even if they don't realize that's what they're doing, and then it turns into a profession.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, when I left, the corporate structure and, several jobs in the corporate space and repeatedly had similar problems with, developing health conditions through, and I just attributed it to stress, not understanding how this was related to my nervous system and my autism. And so when I started my own business and I was able to just say, okay, if I want to show up as my best self, if I want to contribute my best in order to make a difference in this, sector of professional development, workforce development, learning that I love so much, what structures do I need? What kind of communication processes are supportive of me and also are ways that I can deliver, excellence with excellence. What norms do I want to create for my team and for how I conduct client work? And I wasn't doing this to, craft differentiators for myself necessarily. That happened. I was really just trying to create a space that I could show up and work that felt supportive to me. And it was about 10 years later that I realized that I'm autistic. But but in this process of just deconstructing what wasn't working for me, sitting at a desk for 8 hours straight, um, and what does work for me is, all of these things like, work not being time-based, but outcome-based. Um, that my client work and my teamwork is relational, that we have shared commitments, but we can also design our own work structures, that we have tasks that are aligned, but team members can accomplish them when they have their best brain. That we have communication norms of being open, honest, transparent, taking initiative. um, no one is going to get in trouble for pointing out a problem. We're going to collaborate around it together. All of these different norms and ways of being that I just felt were supportive and being a good person were actually me being autistic in my business. And it turns out that I've crafted a business that's very supportive of people of all different abilities, and whether that happens to be disability or whether that happens to be a stay-at-home mom keeping a foot in the workforce, or a designer who has a full-time job but is trying to make ends meet. We have this beautiful, flexible, collaborative framework that we live and work in, and then that is supportive of our clients and their learners. We're really able to create incredible transformational learning because of the way we just are and the way we can show up in our work.
Right. So is this approach something that has been generally welcomed, generally ignored? What is the I know generalizations can often get us in trouble. But what's been your impression of the response from people in the HR field to what you're trying to create or help them create, so that they can have teams who are more productive, more effective, and more satisfied?
What I perceive is that people like the idea of the um, framework yet flexibility, but the execution of it is really challenging within the corporate norms of time equals, you know, dollars and productivity, and our performance goals within an organization tied to things that aren't necessarily centered in the gift set of the employee, but are centered in the objectives of the business. I mean, naturally, right?
Right.
Members of my team all have a very distinct role to play, and they're able to perform out of um, their core talent rather than having multidisciplinary roles, and that's different. And so some of what we're doing, you can't pick it up and put it into the corporate framework. It's an entirely way of doing business. It's an entirely way of structuring a business. And some people look at our team and they're like, what do you mean everyone doesn't work 80 hours a week? What do you mean everyone's not sitting at a desk when I'm asking a question?
Oh my
But
gosh.
our clients, like, when we tell them this is how we're structured, they're like, "Oh, really? I had no idea. I would have thought that you were right there by the phone," right? Because they feel served, they feel seen, they see that our work product is excellent. And so realizing that different structures can support that so that everyone can have a place in the workforce and that's satisfying and supportive is a revolutionary idea for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Right. I recently had a conversation with a fellow from Dallas who's been in the disability space for a long time, and he is forever aggravated by the business owners he talks to about work from home because travel logistics are a nightmare for people with physical disabilities, and sometimes for neuro, I imagine just the stress of it. But he's often told, if they're not in the office, how do we know they're working? And he's
Exactly.
he has a hard time getting them to understand that productivity is not based solely on attendance, and in many cases the numbers prove out that people working from home are actually delivering more work for the same amount of value than if they were going into work every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Butts and seats doesn't equal better work.
No, unless you are a concert performer, a movie producer, somebody who gets paid based on attendance, yes, that's butts in the seats doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing better. It could actually mean you're doing a whole lot worse, depending on how I'm very blessed. You know, I'm currently of the clients I work with. I'm really blessed that Alex Sanfilippo from Podmatch was my very first one. He's also a friend and mentor, and I
Mm.
and the reason I bring him up is he likes to refer to himself as a customer focused entrepreneur, and it seems to me like along those same lines, you're really hoping to find an employee focused or a goal or task oriented focused entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think that is descriptive. In creating a structure that has structure, but also allows for individual flexibility within it. I mean, we still have our agreements, we still have policies, we still have culture, but I love working from home because I can manage everything about my environment so it's supportive for me. And I have my kitchen right there. And so can everyone else. And it's true, like travel is stressful. And so I do the vast majority of my work virtually, and it's really effective. There are some things, of course, that are better in person when it comes to consulting and facilitating, and I'm happy to do that. But that's a reality that I have to book rest time after trips so that I can recover because it requires a different level of expenditure for my nervous system.
Well, you know what's interesting about that is I did my first speaking event in 2017. I've made several trips for speaking and promoting my work as a writer. The one thing I have always tried to do and have advocated to other writers and speakers is um, schedule time off before you leave, schedule some when you get back, and please try not to feel like you have to schedule every single minute as something work related while you're away.
That's sage advice right there.
And
Don't
it,
skip it.
yeah, and it sounds like that's how you've had to approach your autism and your AUDHD is you have to understand that and leave yourself time to decompress before, during, and after. And those are things that aren't always going to be understood even by event organizers.
Unfortunately, that's true. I approach rest as part of my work because if
I
I
love
don't
that.
rest, if I don't take care of my nervous system, then I'm setting myself up for failure and I won't be able to deliver the results that I've promised, that I intend. And so it's not a reward. Rest is absolutely a requirement.
I love that. I wish more people would understand it and talk about it and be brave enough to put it out there the way you just did, because it's one of those things that's still kind of it's a little woo woo for the rest of the world. But I agree with you. We have to see it as a necessary part of being successful in our work or our personal lives.
And everyone would benefit from that, not just people who have neurodivergent nervous systems, not just people with physical disability, but everyone who's seeking, quote unquote, balance in their life. One of the things they're looking for is the right to rest.
I love that, the right to rest. My friend Mariella Paulino, who has been counseling me on rest and taking time to breathe between projects, would be very impressed and appreciative of that. I'll have to mention that to her. Um, so, I'm speaking with Tracy King, and she is the founder of Inspire ED, and her team, they work with professional associations and continuing education providers to create learning experiences that make a difference. As she says, no boring education here. And y'all can find her at expire-ed.com. So I'd like to get back to some of the things me and you were talking about before we press record. And I'll probably put this in the show notes just to let people know that I think the best stuff probably starts about right here. Uh, we were talking about the whole idea of other, of disability, of language, and I'd just like to, I'd like for us to talk more about the way things are now and what we might be able to do as far as changing the conversation or making it easier for people with a variety of life challenges to all agree that we all need help.
Yeah, yeah. This is a tangle, and part of it is just how we're encultured in our society to think that disability is a bad thing, to equate it with defect, rather than to realize we can be enabled or disabled by the structures, institutions, systems, processes, buildings, infrastructure, the norms around us. I recently read Tiffany Yu's book, The Anti-Ableist Manifesto. It is profound. It is a whole meal. um, and it really challenged me because this is something that I had to come to terms with when I self-discovered autism, and then I was confirmed by an assessor that I do have support needs, and it's my job to advocate for myself. If I don't want to persist in continuing to mask and deplete myself to the point of illness, then I have to come to terms with the fact that I do have support needs, that I am being disabled by different structures and norms. And it's a sensitive conversation in the neurodiversity sector. Some people do not want to align with the word disability. They want to talk about neurodiversity as an identity, which it is. It's both a disability and identity. But again, disability does not mean defect. And when we come to terms with the fact that when we want to lean into masking and not identify with the exclusion that is rampant in our systems and our culture, then we're perpetuating it in a way. Rather than opening the conversation to, yeah, I have support needs. I'm able to perform at this level, but others like me are going to have even greater support needs. And this is why I've come out so publicly about what my needs are. A lot of people, when I first started talking about being autistic, were like, nah, you're not. Because I'm so high masking. It's like, but you don't see behind the curtain and how devastating that's been to me. And I need to have this, to be open about this so that others feel comfortable advocating for their needs as well. And I'm doing this as a mama bear too, because I have kids in the workforce now at the beginning of their careers and want them to step into the workforce and find greater safety around advocating for their needs.
Right.
It starts with our language.
Yes. So before you get more into language, do you think part of the disbelief among your friends is that they just didn't want you to be autistic? That that would mean something about them maybe if you had been ADHD all these years and they didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, that might be part of it. I think also part of it is the ableism around autism as a label and thinking, "Oh, that's quote unquote bad. That's defective," right? I
Yeah.
don't see it that way. And so they're in effect saying a couple of things. Oh, you couldn't be because you're able to X, Y, and Z. You speak, you consult, you own a business, so you couldn't be disabled. You couldn't be autistic. Um, and they think that's a compliment, and it's not.
I personally struggle with the whole ableism thing because I'm one of those people. I prefer to just do the work and not really focus too much on the words that are used. But I can look back during times in my life and I can see where I think the most common example is even now, some people will ask me, how does a blind person have a blog or a podcast? As if that's not something they see as a possibility given my disability.
Exactly, exactly. And so we were chatting about the importance of visibility, right?
Yes.
And that reduces the assumptions that are made when people other people, because they're like, wait, Max is my colleague. We're both bloggers. Like, he's really talented. I get so much out of his contributions. And suddenly, it, it's just starting to crumble those barriers and those assumptions, and we can just have a more inclusive conversation. It's so visibility is so important. I understand the sensitivity. And that's something that I have wrestled with and continue to really challenge myself around. And I don't mean to say everyone has to hold the same opinion that I do about this, but I just one thing I will share is that particularly for women, for people who have an estrogen based body. As we hit perimenopause and we have less access to estrogen, that significantly decreases estrogen protections that allow us to mask autism and ADHD. And so suddenly there's more brain fog, there's more executive function challenges, there's more inflammation in the body causing chronic pain and other challenges. There's more headaches, there's more, right? And all of our um, previously more manageable or easier to mask neurodivergent traits are dialed up and suddenly cannot apply the same strategies to them anymore. And if you hit a burnout at that stage in perimenopause, as you're cresting menopause, you will find that you're never going to recover the same level of function after a significant burnout. And that's gonna that has helped me rethink
Yeah.
the support
So
needs.
it's yeah. So it's
Yeah.
it's kind of like the person in their 40s that finally realized if I don't change my diet, I may not live to 70. And you're basically saying that you've discovered that if you continue to mask and um, uh, prevent yourself from living authentically, that as you get older, you'll be less and less able. So the only smart solution is to be more open about it now, so that you maybe don't have to be so open about it later, or have to have a meltdown, or maybe even be hospitalized or have to leave the workforce before you planned on.
Right, that right there. I mean, just mic drop on that. And so, you know, I had support needs back in the day. I was able to mask more than I am now. But realizing that having an open conversation about support needs allows everyone to ask for their support needs to be met. And we don't have to feel like we're consuming resources that we're not allowed access to. We should be open in conversation that everyone belongs. That's what inclusion means. Everyone belongs. And so we can co create spaces where everyone can belong. But you're absolutely right. If we just want to lean into masking to preserve this saving face, then there is definitely a higher chance um, of the kind of illness that will take us out of the workforce. Yeah.
Okay. And I would imagine one of the issues even now, because I recently was exposed to this by a friend who's a filmmaker in Singapore. Even now, there are probably people who think, though, if I stop masking, I could lose my job.
That's a risk, in some respects, and it's also important to realize there are some people that don't have the privilege of masking, um, and so there's asking people to completely unmask is not the assignment. Masking is a coping strategy. It's a way to exist in spaces that weren't designed for us, and there will always be, as long as systems are perpetuated in this way, some requirement to do so. But if we don't have the conversations around support needs, then that requirement is so much higher and so less accessible to more neurodivergent people than if we have open conversations, if we design to be inclusive from the start, which is what we really intend to do with all the learning that we design, so that there there are fewer barriers to hurdle.
Okay, so how do we do this right? How do we have the conversation or create an environment where the person who is neurodivergent feels comfortable enough to have this conversation so that they can either become part of the team or stay in a position that they are happy with at this point?
Mm. Well, first, it's really important that executive leadership understand that cognitive diversity exists. Cognitive diversity is everywhere. And there are more neurodivergent people than we probably even realize because of the lack of access to formal assessment, which has been a requirement to gain access to supports through the education system, right? And so now that we're in the workforce, um, there are a lot of people who don't know that they're neurodivergent that could benefit from inclusive design. And just realizing that inclusive design benefits everyone, but it's a requirement for some. And so understanding that cognitive diversity exists, that cognitive diversity is an advantage for an organization because we know that dyslexic and ADHD adults are more innovative and more entrepreneurial than the general population. I believe the statistic is 8 times. Um, there a large number of entrepreneurs who've created some of the most successful businesses globally are neurodivergent. That one studies found that one ADHD person on a team results in higher quality and more innovative problem solving than no neurodivergent professionals on a team. We know that it's a strategic advantage to include neurodivergent people in the workforce. But that also means that we have to provide for them so that they can be their best self. And a lot of these supports are really, they're not out of reach things. We're talking about how our spaces are set up. We're talking about communication norms. We're talking about how we use and share materials together. We're talking about our processes and how we measure performance. And so if we just think through the needs and are able to open safe spaces for discussion, you'll see more disclosure and more collaboration that we can co-create these spaces and processes together. But as long as people do not accept that cognitive diversity is so widespread and aren't open to flexibility that's required and the supports that are required, of course, people are going to mask um, and not want to put themselves at risk. So it really starts with executive leadership.
Right. We still have the same problem within the vision loss community where we spend a fair amount of time teaching kids, teenagers, young adults, um, how to decide to disclose their disability, when, and even who has the right to know that they have a disability. So it is a continuing thing. I love that you shared those statistics of how there are practical uh, positive effects on a group of employees by adding just one person who's neurodivergent to the team. Or I imagine the same thing applies if you improve your processes so that the one or two people you already have that you don't know you have also can be more productive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, there's a lot of studies that show that what professionals want, what they would ask for, are really low cost for the most part. Most of the requests, the supports are in terms of flexibility and norms, just having a mutual understanding so that we understand each other and can collaborate better.
Right. I had somebody recently told me that it's amazing that while there's still more work to be done, we are more willing to accommodate a pregnant woman than we are to accommodate somebody who is neurodivergent, even though there's a lot more people who will have longer experiences with being neurodivergent in their workforce.
Right, that's wild, right? I mean, our current stats are 1 in 5 people are dyslexic. 1 in 9 people are ADHD. And we know that 50% of ADHD folks likely have autism as well. They have autistic traits. Um, autistic people, 80% of autistic people have ADHD traits. So there's a lot of us. And we really want to co-create a better world together.
Right. Well, one thing that I'm hoping today is the beginning of is I feel like there are these fences within the disability community, for lack of a better way to refer to ourselves, that prevent people with physical disabilities, people with disabilities, people with developmental disabilities from communicating, collaborating, and co-advocating. So I'm one thing I do hope that will continue to happen on this podcast is I will get the chance to speak to people like you who can bring a different but similar experience in the area of improving inclusion.
Yeah, I think we have a lot more in common than we don't, and co-advocating is such an important part of our future.
Right. So you said most of the things that people who are neurodivergent need are not expensive. They're really more a matter of the way um, people communicate within the workforce. And it sounds like there are some great benefits to an employer who's willing to make the effort for people who are neurodivergent, or to make their workplace somewhere that would be attractive to people who are dealing with those kinds of challenges. What are the wider benefits to the economy, to the society, by making it so that this large number of people we're talking about today can have meaningful work and participate in the economy?
Well, that's a great question. We know that there's a lot of turnover that's happening in the corporate world right now. That while our culture likes to support small business, there are a lot of barriers for people who are disabled to create and maintain their businesses. So there are opportunities to really rethink how we support neurodivergent entrepreneurs and neurodivergent folks that are inside of corporations in order to like stem the flow of all of that turnover and support the innovation and growth of new businesses. Um, we are also, as you know, a globe facing a lot of innovation challenges as we're looking at the rapid development of new technologies, particularly those that are integrating AI features, as we're looking at the globalization of the workforce, as we're looking at onboarding Gen Z into the workforce and more boomers retiring. There's a lot of change that's happening, which is requiring a lot of innovation, rethinking how we do things, how work is structured, how we collaborate with technology. And if we're excluding some of the most innovative and entrepreneurial people, how are we expecting that we're gonna get there? And so it's imperative that we rethink how we can support these creative, divergent thinkers that come up with, these beautiful, innovative pathways forward, so that we can co-create this new future together. And if we're thinking in terms of um, the sustainability of businesses and and the future of the workforce, we have to think about diversity. When we look at Gen Z, they are the most diverse generation to date. According to a recent Zen Business survey, 50% of them identify with neurodivergence. They require certain things like corporations um, having a positive impact on climate and sustainability, having positive work life balance. They're looking at work differently than generations past. And so it's imperative for corporate culture to shift with that and to understand that this isn't just some young people having an attitude. This is our future. Our future is diverse, and we have an opportunity to support that, and to support all of the better decision making, the stronger cultures and solutions, problem solving that happens when we embrace diversity within the workforce.
Right. And a couple of things that I thought of specifically in the area of small business. We know that small businesses are the best way to drive the future economy. So, improving the access for people with disabilities to funding, to mentoring, to networking is just an investment in our future as a country. And then, as far as employment, um, every person I've talked to in HR says it's a lot cheaper to keep the people you have than to constantly have to recruit, attract, hire, and onboard over and over again. So it would seem to me that if accommodations are not expensive, which I know they aren't, that it's in the business's best interest to collaborate with people who are neurodivergent or who have other life challenges to make sure that they want to stay where they're at.
Absolutely, absolutely. Small business entrepreneurship is fundamental to the growth of our economy, and we create stronger work cultures, and can definitely save some money on that revolving door if we just support our peeps.
Well, I've really enjoyed having you on the podcast, and I would just like for you, what would you say is the the most important thing you could tell people who are either employers as small business owners or who are leaders in the field of HR? What is the most important thing you could tell them about people who are neurodivergent or who have some sort of challenge based on their abilities?
Hmm. One thing, you're limiting me to one. Uh,
Well, you see, on this podcast, we have a rule that the guest can always answer a better question than the host asks. So if you need two or three, go for it.
oh gosh. Well, I would say that neurodivergent people are everywhere. We're in your teams. We're in your companies. We're your vendors. We're your customers, your clients. And in co-creating a more inclusive world is something that benefits everyone. I would also say that there are a lot of resources available for HR professionals, for our C-suite leaders, to learn about neurodivergence in the workforce, neuro inclusion in your strategy and operational structures. There is so much training out there that's available that you could include for your employees, or hire trainers to come in. I recommend you hire neurodivergent trainers if you're delivering neurodivergent training. But in order to facilitate these conversations about what neurodivergence is, what kinds of support structures are beneficial, how we can co-create a stronger team and work setting together. Lots of resources available at the tips of your fingers.
Right. Not the least of which is inspire-ed.com, right? I mean,
For sure, reach out to me.
yeah, I mean, make sure you check with Tracy. Um, hopefully, this is what I hope for any of my conversations is that hopefully you've heard something today that makes you want to have a conversation with my guest to learn more about what they may do or may see within what you're doing. Um, I know that interest doesn't always turn into being hired, but to me, conversations, communication, collaboration, those are at the heart of how I prefer to see the world improved as in the area of accessibility and inclusion. So I do sincerely hope y'all will reach out to Tracy at inspire-ed.com, and I'll also include her social media links because she is very active on LinkedIn, and so that'll be a good place for y'all to find her too. And I just really have enjoyed having this conversation. It's um, it's it's really kind of I wish I had some of the numbers for vision loss that you have at your fingertips for neurodivergence. I'm going to have to do some homework for myself. So, also another rule of this podcast that if Max doesn't learn something or relearn something, it was a bad episode. So we got that box checked, and both of us laughed quite a bit. But sincerely, y'all do check out her website and her LinkedIn page, and consider asking her opinion or hiring her and her team. And as far as the accessibilityadvantage.com, which is where I work from, as somebody who is an expert in disability, having to do mostly with vision loss and more with digital than in person, but uh, happy to collaborate with some of the people I've met along the way. Should somebody need a complete full service approach to improving accessibility in their company, and that's the accessibilityadvantage.com. What Tracy has been saying today is that accessibility inclusion is in everyone's best interest, just as I am always telling y'all. I hope that y'all enjoyed the podcast and that you'll join us again next time. So thank you, and please do what you can to keep yourself safe out there. Disabled people, we tell our friends and share to our social sites. Don't think about how hard it is. Just focus on those dollar signs. Cause accessibility ain't just for those with disabilities. Makes the world better for everyone, online as well as in person.
Item chooser menu. One item end stream button. End stream button. End the stream. Ultra set not yet. End stream. End stream.